Well, hello again from here on the streets of Gosforth, where every now and again you do spot a certain Sandro Tonali walking his dog. And to be fair, during the past 6 months or so, he has had plenty of time to do that, hasn't he? And it is Tonali I want to speak about today. He's been in the news this week, of course. Yesterday brought confirmation the 10-month global ban he was given by the Italian authorities previously. That won't be extended. The FA, well, they've returned a 2-month suspended sentence, which means Tonali is still free to play again for Newcastle at the back end of August, as we expected that would be the case. Now, what I want to talk about, what I want to explore is why Tonali still has it all to prove at Newcastle, and that isn't because he was going to be like, the proverbial new signing yet. That was the least surprising question asked of Eddie in his press conference this morning. Eddie went along with it, to be fair. But no, I just think we can't ignore what we saw from Tonali prior to the ban. It was only a relatively small body of evidence pre-season, plus 12 games, only 8 of those in the Premier League. But I do still think it's worth asking the question of, what he can bring to Newcastle and where he fits within the team. Because almost during the ban, it's been, and we say this about a lot of players, don't we, that the more they're out, the more they grow in popularity, they grow in stature. Sometimes a player's best spell can be when they're on the sidelines. That has always been the case. It will forever be the case. And we've seen it a little bit with Tonali, especially given the problems Newcastle have had this season. How many times has it been said or written, if only Tonali was there, what a difference he would make? And yes, I go along with that to an extent, to a degree, but I used the phrase before there, I won't ignore what I saw and what I felt during the early part of that season. Now, there is massive mitigation for that, and we will explore it. This isn't a definitive Sandro Tonali is wonderful, Sandro Tonali is bad, Sandro Tonali is anything. It's just discussing what is a newsy subject, and one which is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out when he does return in August, and a little bit on the news side of it. Now, we don't expect to see him play again until August in public, because part of the ban given to him, I'm just going to just play with the traffic there. It's close. Part of the ban given to him by the Italian authorities meant that he can't play in matches in public. That is our understanding. So, end of season tours of Australia, potentially Japan in the summer as well. We won't see Tonali. Now, to go back to last summer, and when Tonali came in, we all assumed, looking at it, that Newcastle were going to sign a number 6. And if you didn't have any prior knowledge of Tonali or Italian football, he, to all intents and purposes, looked like a holding midfielder. Now, that wasn't the case in the end. Tonali, if anything, was a replication or a variation of Kamara, someone who preferred rather to play in the number 8 position. And when he first came in, the opening game against Aston Villa, wow, Jimmy Redknapp said on Sky at the time, we all wrote it, we all said it, that was just one of, if not the most impressive Premier League debut from a midfielder. Sensational, opens the scoring after 5 or 6 minutes, and he just plays. I think I wrote at the time, he played like an alpha male with a real pomp, with a real majesty about him. He was strutting come the end. It was quite incredible to witness that. It really was. I thought he was tremendous that day. And you looked at it and thought, wow, £52 million. That is actually a steal given the age, the profile. AC Milan captain, Italy international. Newcastle have gone and signed one of the very best midfielders in Europe. And within that game, within that 90 minutes, you could see all of the reasons why Eddie Howe used the phrase, he fell in love with the player. I'll tell you a tale. I'd been out in Italy for the Champions League semi-final last year between AC Milan and Inter, and afterwards on these very streets I'd round about, I bumped into a couple of the guys from Newcastle, spoken to them about Tonali and said, of all the players there I saw during those 2 legs, I thought he was the best. I also said, I'm not entirely convinced he's suited to the Premier League. I thought he didn't run as hard back over in the other direction. They nodded along. This was at a time when he hadn't been linked with Newcastle at all. And yet within 6 weeks, he was a £52 million signing. So, it just shows what I know. They obviously agreed with part of what I said, but didn't share the same concerns. But no, he came in, and like I say, I can see why Eddie used that phrase, he fell in love watching him play, because when I saw him in Italy that night, again, I used that word, there's a majesty, there's a strut, there's something so aesthetically pleasing about how he runs, how he receives the ball, how he kicks the ball, how he, there's an aggression about him. He bustles through things. I saw all of that night, and we saw it against Aston Villa and in flashes elsewhere. But you're probably thinking, when you get to the boot, I'm going to get to the boot, because ultimately, by the time Tonali was banned, he played his way out of the team. You know, Sean Longstaff had come back in, and all of the noise around Longstaff now he's playing every week. You know, Sean isn't in a great place at the moment performance-wise, you know, and you know what I think of him. I think a lot of him, but nonetheless, at the start of the season, Longstaff came back in, and he picked up, after a little injury problem, he picked up where he'd finished last season when he was tremendous. And how did he play his way out of the team? Well, it became apparent for me pretty quickly that Tonali needed time. He needed time to adapt. That's what it looked like anyway. He looked like a player who would come in, bar the debut, who would come in from Serie A, where this league is quicker, the Premier League, you know, it is more intense, and perhaps it was just something about the energy, the adrenaline of that home match against Aston Villa that enabled Tonali to show his very best, because what we saw after that, well, it can't be, you know, it just could not be his level, because the game down at Brighton, I remember when he pulled out of a challenge on the edge of the box, Brighton scored from it, did a similar sort of thing at West Ham as well, and there was just something there where, and again, you know, you try to be honest, you want these guys to work, you want them to do well, you want them to see him play like he did against Aston Villa. You know, people at the time were coming back to me and saying I was being very negative around Tonali. I wasn't being negative, I was just saying what I saw basically, and that was a player who I couldn't believe, you know, that's a bit strong, but I'd noted, I think, you know, everyone would agree now on reflection, that he dropped off that level. He didn't look like a £52 million marquee signing, evidenced by the fact that he, like I say, he played his way out of the team. Now, it may have been the case that he knew that something was coming down the tracks in terms of the betting investigation, and that would be understandable were that to be the case. He certainly, even when you saw him sort of around the place, around the squad, and I think this is perhaps his personality anyway, but he was very quiet, he was very withdrawn. I remember when we were over in America, I went up to speak to him in my pidgin Italian. Now, it may be my Italian that was the problem, but, you know, he didn't seem sort of over enamoured to engage in conversation. Again, you know, maybe that was because he's a new surrounds and just didn't feel comfortable, or again, it could have been my attempt at Italian, or just the fact I'm a journalist. I don't know, but there was just something about him, and I expressed this in these videos and in print. There was just a little seed of doubt with Tonali during those early weeks that made me think something wasn't quite there, wasn't quite right, and I thought that was backed up in terms of his performances. Now, the ban comes and he spends all of this time out of the team, and now we're looking at, you know, a player coming back in August, as, like I said, as Eddie agreed this morning, the proverbial new signing. Now, why on the back of that do I think it could be? And Eddie used this morning. He said, he probably, I don't know if he fully believes this himself, but, you know, he did say it. Tonali could one day look back and think, you know, that could be exactly what I needed to adjust to settle in England. I don't think he'd ever make that admission. I think he would rather the betting ban had never happened, to be honest with you. But I could see what Eddie meant in terms of that. And I'd go along with that because there's no doubt about what he is as a footballer. Also, the PSG at home, you know, the 4-1 victory that night. Now, everyone played well there. And, you know, you look at Kamara and Longstaff that night, they were absolutely incredible. But Tonali was part of a good team performance. And I think he was brought in for that sort of night, that Champions League pedigree, that experience, that class. Why Eddie brought him in was he wanted his side to evolve into one who kept the football. He thought last year, season before that, there were too many games where Newcastle either had a negative possession count south of 50%. He wanted Tonali to come in and to help him. I use that word, it's the word Eddie used, to evolve into a team who kept the ball, who were better with it, who were in charge of their own destiny, you know, dictating their own fate more. Tonali would and could have aided with that. The point I make is that maybe Eddie was right when he said that in a roundabout sort of way. The 10 months has given him a chance to learn the language, to acclimatise to a new country where he perhaps didn't want to be. You know, ultimately, again, I go back to that night in Milan before the Champions League game, and we sat down with him in the press conference room, and unprompted, he just launched into, you know, 4 or 5 reasons why he didn't feel necessarily comfortable at his new club, and he had found it difficult to adapt. So maybe this period of time would have ironed out those concerns he's got. Maybe it has given him time to adapt to the speed here. And it was really interesting this morning when Eddie was asked on what they've worked on with Sandro Tonali. He used that word speed, because I thought during those games he didn't look quick enough. Everything he did was in sort of closed little spaces, which he was wonderful at. You know, again, that ability, that is not in question. But he said this morning, yeah, they've worked on his pace with him. I thought that was really revealing, really interesting. So for him to come back having Newcastle identified and worked on areas of improvement. The whole acclimatisation aspect, but most importantly of all, ridding himself of what would have been, this mental burden of the betting investigation and the betting ban, which was ultimately handed down. To be free of that must be such a weight off his shoulders. And when he does come back in August, yes, he has it all to prove, because I don't think this is someone who was just, picking up where he left off. I actually think he's got quite a lot to prove based on what we saw in those 12 matches. And also he's got it to prove because he owes the club. Wow, I think the club have handled this really well. Now, I say that because could have taken a different approach. Now, if you sign someone for that amount of money and they arrive knowing they've got an issue that could cause a problem for the new club, they continue to do the thing that they know will cause an issue. And there's a whole separate conversation that we had about addiction. And of course, if that did have a hold of him, well, then by its very nature he couldn't have helped that. But Newcastle, the point I make is Newcastle could have taken a different approach. They didn't. Eddie used the phrase, they put their arms around Sandro Tonali. They protected the player. They also protected their asset as well. But I think on the whole, the way they've handled this has been very good. So when Tonali does come back, I really do think and hope that Newcastle will have that player with that want and that desire to repay the faith the club have shown them, to repay that support, and for him to replicate what we saw during that opening game against Aston Villa. Because wow, if he can, what a player. And that really will be a pleasure. It'll be exciting. It'll be fascinating to see how it all does unfold. Now, away from Sandro Tonali, there is a game down at Burnley tomorrow, and on the fitness front, Fabian Schär won't be available, Kieran Trippier won't be available. Schär, now Eddie said he thought he might be out for the season. I think Schär has perhaps looked at the optics of that, and he's released something to the Swiss press this afternoon saying that he does still expect to play before the end of the campaign. He'll be fine for the Euros, so perhaps Fabian Schär was thinking internationally. Kieran Trippier, he's in Dubai at the moment, as I reported earlier this week. He'll be back from Dubai, I think, tomorrow, return to training next week. That's the plan. And he could, whatever way you want to phrase it, be okay for Brighton next week. Now, going to Burnley, they're going there without Nick Pope, without Kieran Trippier, without Sven Botman, without Fabian Schär. That really is quite something in terms of that defence upon which so much of Newcastle's success has been built. That, for me, would remove an element of confidence as it starts to, rain on me as I start making Newcastle predictions. So I'm going to take a little bit of shelter here under a tree, as much shelter as I can get. But anyway, I just wouldn't go with a great deal of confidence to Burnley. Based on the last two matches, Crystal Palace, we've been over that performance. And while the game against Sheffield United was an actual contest, in the first 45 minutes before in the second half descended into this weird game where, for whatever reason, Sheffield United chucked the towel in. But while it was a contest, Newcastle were poor. Sheffield United cut through them. I thought there was real cause for concern in that first half. So yeah, while Sandro Tonali's got all to prove when he comes back, I think Newcastle have got a fair bit to prove based on the last two matches when they go down to Burnley tomorrow. And I wouldn't go there, even though Burnley are in the bottom three, they're enjoying a revival. I wouldn't go there assuming Newcastle are going to come away with the 3 points. I think it might just be difficult for them. Now, in other news, away from what's happening on the pitch, I'm told that Dougie Freeman, as sporting director, reported this last week. I'm told he is right there in the frame as well. If I was going to say if I was a betting man, probably not the appropriate phrase for this current video, bearing in mind the subject I started with. Yeah, but I do think Freeman now is perhaps in pole position to get that role. And also a little bit of news this week regarding Toshin Abajo, the Fulham centre-half. Now, I do think my information is that while there is a lot of interest, he's a free agent, of course, this summer, a little bit of information, I think he might just be leaning towards a move to St James's Park. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. Lloyd Kelly, those talks go on as well. But again, as I reported previously, a little bit of to and fro over what the agent fee might be there, another free agent. So that's guys who are coming in. Will be coming into a team who are playing European football? Well, the next four matches are going to determine that. Sadly, I won't be down at Burnley tomorrow. A long story, not for the want of me, not wanting to be there, but anyway, I won't be, but there'll be loads of coverage on that across all mail platforms. Next week, will be back in the Parc des Princes for the second leg of Paris Saint-Germain versus Borussia Dortmund. Lucky enough to be out there for the first leg. on Wednesday night, which was quite, honestly guys, I think, you know, when we were there with Newcastle earlier in the season, I think we were cheated for whatever reason out of the very best of the noise and the atmosphere inside the stadium. Perhaps it was the group stage where they normally do populate, so there wasn't that intensity, that ferocity, but the other night, it was just an absolute different level. I'll put a little link in the description below to a video I did for the Mail while I was out there. Please do watch it if you can. But yeah, guys, that's it for me for now. I'm going to go and try and find cover somewhere, coffee shop or pub. I don't know which one. Yeah, I'll go to the latter. But it is Friday. But anyway, guys, thank you again for watching. Please hit like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you again next week. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.